I don't know exactly when my life stopped being my own. Maybe it was the day my mother-in-law had her first stroke, and everyone looked at me as if they already knew the answer, as if there was no need to discuss it. "You're going to take care of it, aren't you?" And I said yes, not because I wanted to, not because I had a close relationship with her. In fact, I never did. But she was there, defenseless, and I couldn't leave an elderly woman alone when everyone else was slipping away with excuses. At first, I thought it would be temporary, a few weeks, maybe a couple of months until she recovered. But the months turned into years, and each year, a little more of her faded away, while I slowly faded away. I learned to change adult diapers, to administer medications I couldn't even pronounce properly, to bathe her gently, to lift her without hurting her, to soothe her nighttime panic attacks. I didn't do it willingly, but I did it carefully, because in a way, she was part of my family too, because no one else would. My husband worked a lot. That was his excuse. My in-laws lived in other cities. That was his excuse too. And so slowly, everything fell on my shoulders. I became the official caregiver, without pay, without recognition, without respite. There were days when she looked at me coldly, without saying a word, others when she cried like a child, others when she simply slept. And I, between unwashed dishes, beds to remake, doctor's appointments, and paperwork, was forgetting who I was before all this. Some friends stopped calling me. Others simply assumed I had other priorities. I lost jobs. I missed birthdays. I missed opportunities. But I never complained, because I convinced myself that doing the right thing doesn't always bring rewards, that life isn't fair, but that dignity lies in continuing to care, even when no one is watching. I especially remember one night. She'd had a difficult episode. She was agitated, screaming. I calmed her down, spoke softly, changed her clothes, and hugged her. And as I cradled her like a big girl, she said something that pierced my heart. "Where is my daughter? I don't want you to touch me." His daughter hadn't come in 3 years. I remained silent. I settled her in bed. I turned off the light. That night, I cried in the bathroom, but not out of anger. I cried because I had been erased so much that they didn't even recognize me as part of the painting. And yet, the next day, I went back to taking care of her as usual. If this story is resonating with you, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there, because that's how my life was. The years that nobody wanted to live, I lived them for everyone. Every day began with the same sound, her medication alarm. 6:09 a.m. sharp. While my husband was still asleep, I was already up, my eyes still heavy and my feet cold against the floor. The first thing I did was check if she was still breathing. Yes, that brutal, because there were nights when I feared I wouldn't hear her again, and there were mornings when, secretly, I wished I didn't. Then came the mechanical process, lifting her, changing her diapers, carefully cleaning her body so she wouldn't feel humiliated. I spoke to her gently, even though she didn't respond. Sometimes she looked at me with disdain, as if everything I did was nothing more than my duty. I would make her breakfast, cut her pills into tiny pieces, and check that she hadn't scratched herself during the night. I would play music from her era so she wouldn't feel so alone. I would sit with her even if I had a million things to do. And when she finally fell asleep again, I would rush off to shower, get dressed, and prepare what I could for lunch. That was the cycle. There were no weekends. There were no holidays. There was no rest. My social life dwindled. My friends stopped inviting me out because they knew I couldn't go out. My family called me less and less because I was always busy. Even my dreams, the simplest ones, were postponed. A small business, going back to school, even a vacation. Everything was put on hold. Sometimes they would ask me, "Can't your husband help more?" And I would smile. I didn't want any conflict. But the truth is, he couldn't see anything anymore. He had gotten used to me doing everything, to me carrying the weight of the illness, the exhaustion, the neglect. Once I got sick, high fever, chills. I could barely stand. But even so, I cooked for her mother. Even so, I cleaned the floor when she had an accident. No one asked me how I felt. No one offered me help. That's when I realized I had disappeared, that I was a functional presence, but invisible. My mother-in-law never said thank you to me. She never held my hand. She never asked how I was. Sometimes I felt like I was a shadow bringing her pills and food, and yet, I never stopped doing it, because I believed, naively, that love was built on sacrifices, that at some point, someone would see all that I had given, that life somehow would reward me. But life isn't a fair story, and she would soon discover how cruel the silence that follows sacrifice can be. There was such a consistent pattern that I could already anticipate it. All it took was for her to get worse, for something to deviate from the script of what was bearable, for them to appear. The familiar ghosts who lived far away, who didn't answer calls, who didn't even send a birthday card, would suddenly show up at home. They entered with their heads held high, with words full of feigned concern, with searching eyes that looked for flaws where there was only tiredness. "Why does she have that bruise on her arm?" they asked, without even imagining how difficult it is to hold an elderly person when they resist. "Has she eaten yet?" they said, as if I didn't eat 3 times a day. "Don't you think you should take her to another specialist?" they suggested, ignoring that I had exhausted every option, every consultation, every resource. But they didn't help. Never. Once her daughter, my sister-in-law, came to visit after more than a year. She stayed for an hour. Just one. She came in wearing expensive perfume and saying empty words, sat next to her mother, took her hand as if in a scene from a play, and took a selfie that she later uploaded to social media with the caption, "Always with you, Mom." That photo got more likes than actual hours spent with her. Meanwhile, I cleaned the bathroom. I washed her clothes. I tried not to make her feel like a burden, even though no one else made the slightest effort to share it. Again, one of her nephews commented that I was controlling her too much, that I probably had access to her accounts. I laughed inwardly. If they only knew how many times I had to use my own money to buy her medication. If they only knew that there were days when I ate less so that nothing would go missing at home. But nobody wanted to know that. They just wanted to feel that, in some corner, they were better than me. The most painful part was not the unfair criticism. It was seeing how my mother-in-law, instead of defending me, instead of saying a single word in my favor, simply remained silent. Or worse, she smiled at them, as if what I did had no value, as if I were just the assistant, the helper, the one who was there because I had nothing better to do. The reality was that I had given up everything, for her, and they only came to pass judgment, and left with a peaceful soul, as if with a quick visit they had made up for years of neglect. As time went on, I began to expect less. I no longer dreamed of public recognition, or even a grand gesture. I only longed for a word, just one, a simple thank you. But that word never came, not on her good days, nor on her worst nights. My mother-in-law only spoke to me when she needed something. Her voice was dry, her tone constant, devoid of emotion. Sometimes I wondered if she hated me, or if she was simply incapable of showing affection. I remember one day in particular. It had been an exhausting day. I had had to bathe her alone. After she got completely filthy, I had been at it for over an hour, my body tense and my patience wearing thin. When I laid her down, I arranged her pillows, covered her feet the way I knew she liked, and gently stroked her hair. He looked at me for a moment. I thought he was going to say something different, but he only murmured, "Leave the light off," and he closed his eyes. At that moment, I understood that I was waiting for something that wasn't going to come, that his affection, if he ever had any, wasn't for me. I tried many times to connect with her. I asked her about her childhood, about her stories. Sometimes she answered with short phrases, other times with a silence so heavy it filled the room. I felt like an intruder in her life, even though I was the one who held her world together every day. One night, in the midst of insomnia, I remembered something my mother told me before she died. There are loves that cannot be returned, but they are given anyway, because that is what makes us human. I clung to that for a long time. I convinced myself that what I was doing made sense, even if it wasn't appreciated, that being good didn't depend on others, but on me. But even kindness has its limits. I started noticing details I hadn't seen before, the things she put away in drawers, the documents that disappeared, the calls she made when I went out shopping. Something was happening behind her back, something that didn't include me. And yet, every night, he continued to bring her the glass of water, the medicine, the kiss on her forehead, as if every gesture of mine was a desperate attempt to write a story that she refused to read. Until one day, he stopped waking up. And then, in the most absolute silence, I understood that the words that never came were the ones that hurt the most. The funeral was simple, too simple for someone who lived 83 years. No one wanted to give a speech. No one brought flowers. Her daughter arrived late. Her nephew left early. And I stayed until the end, not out of love, out of respect, for everything I experienced within those walls where she passed away. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. An elegant woman, dressed in gray, introduced herself as the family lawyer. She carried a folder and had a professional, emotionless expression. We sat down at the dining room table. My husband, his sister, and a couple of nephews. I was there too, not by legal right, but because I had been present through everything else. I felt I at least deserved to hear what this woman had to say. The lawyer began to read the will. Her words were cold, mechanical, minor bequests to some relatives, some antique jewelry for the daughter, her father's watch for a nephew, and then came the phrase that left me breathless. And I leave all my properties, bank accounts, and accumulated assets in the name of Mr. Marcelo Ortega. Silence. No one reacted immediately. The name was completely unfamiliar. He wasn't part of the family. We didn't know him. He wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't a doctor. He was, at least to me, nobody. The lawyer clarified. Marcelo Ortega was her creative writing instructor more than a decade ago. They stayed in touch until the last few months. I didn't understand. I looked at my husband, who shrugged. His sister frowned. The nephews murmured. But no one knew who that man was. Except for her, my mother-in-law. She had chosen him. Him. Not to his children. Not to his grandchildren. Not to me. To a stranger. I felt a heat rise in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was something drier. Sharper. It was the final realization that all those years of care, of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, meant nothing to her. Nothing. I wondered if I'd done something wrong, if I'd ever said anything to offend her, if I'd made a mistake she never told me about. But the truth felt more brutal than any explanation. She simply didn't consider me, and in that instant, I felt an emptiness like never before. Not because of the inheritance, not because of the money, but it was clear that, for her, I was never family. After the lawyer left, the house was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of those still trying to process what they had just heard. No one wanted to talk, and the few who did spoke with empty phrases. How strange. Who would have thought? Maybe that man helped her with something we don't know about. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I got up from the table, walked to the kitchen, and opened the window. I needed air, the kind of air that didn't pass through the lungs of all those who feigned surprise without indignation. No one asked how I felt. No one said, "This is unfair to you." No one. Because for them, I was never the one who mattered. Hours later, everyone had left. The daughter with her jewelry, the nephew with his watch, and me, with empty hands and a heavy heart. I sat on the sofa and looked at the walls of that house. Every corner held a piece of me. The marks on the wall where I rested my cane, the adapted chair I installed myself, the shelves I arranged so I could reach things effortlessly. I did it all myself, and yet, I felt like an intruder in my own story. I didn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned in bed, my hands cold and my eyes dry. I couldn't even cry. It was as if my body was on strike, as if my soul were telling me, enough is enough. My husband tried to say something before going to sleep, something lukewarm, something pointless, but no words reached me, because I understood it was too late, that I had expected too much from everyone, that I had expected an emotional reward for a sacrifice they never asked of me, but that they also didn't prevent, because in that family, silence was a form of negligence. The following days were even emptier. No one called me. No one spoke of the will. The name Marcelo Ortega became a specter, a reminder that someone, out there, received the recognition I never did. I questioned many things. Should I have demanded a contract? A document? A commitment? But in doing so, wouldn't I have betrayed what motivated me in the first place? I took care of her because I felt it was the right thing to do, because I believed that love, even unrequited, had value. But the world doesn't work that way. The world sometimes rewards distance, oblivion, convenience. And there I was, exhausted, worn out, alone. Not because of what I lost in possessions, but because of what was denied me in humanity. That was, without a doubt, the cruelest emptiness. A few days passed before I could go into her room. Everything inside me resisted. It was as if the energy of those walls still held sway, as if her absence weighed as heavily as her presence. But I had to do it. There were things that needed tidying, papers to go through, clothes to donate. I opened the door carefully, as if I might wake her up. The room was still untouched. The bed was neatly made, the medications lined up on the dresser, the alarm clock showing the time that had been frozen the day she left. I sat for a moment, observing, breathing in the thick air, heavy with memories. I started opening drawers. Some were full of tissues, creams, and prescriptions. Others contained old photographs, many in black and white, with faces I no longer recognized. And then, in the bottom drawer of the desk, among loose papers and unopened envelopes, I found a letter. It was folded carefully, with my name written on it in a calligraphy I knew all too well. I opened it with trembling hands. "Dear Lucia," she began. My name. Not daughter-in-law, not girl, not she. My name. If you're reading this, it's because I'm no longer here. I don't know if this letter will reach you, or if someone else will get rid of it before you can read it. But I want to write it anyway, because there are things I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I swallowed. My eyes were already blurry. Thank you for everything you did for me. I have no way to explain it. I have no way to thank you. I know I wasn't easy. I know I was unfair at times. But I also know that without you, my last years would have been hell. I want you to know that I saw you, even though I didn't say so. That I heard your footsteps at night, your sighs while you took care of me, your tiredness. That sometimes I pretended to be asleep, just so I wouldn't have to look into your eyes filled with pain. And I also want you to know the truth about Marcelo Ortega. I felt the air stop in my lungs. Marcelo was my last friend. He listened to me when no one else wanted to hear me anymore. He helped me write, to remember who I was before the illness, before old age. I asked him to help me protect something important, but he wasn't the one who kept everything. I left things for you, not in papers, not in visible inheritances, but in hands that will know how to return them to you. If this letter reaches you, then someone kept their promise. He said nothing more. She signed it with a single word. Thank you. Several days passed since I read the letter. I didn't show it to anyone. Not my husband, not his sister, not my nephews. It was mine. A piece of dignity that, although late, fell like rain after a long drought. But the letter by itself did not explain everything. What did he mean by, "I left things for you"? What did he mean by Marcelo not keeping everything? And what was it that someone owed me back? I was torn between thinking it was a symbolic form of gratitude, or whether there was really something more hidden beneath that incomplete story. Days later, I received a call. It was Marcelo Ortega. Her voice was calm, measured, almost melancholic. She told me that my mother-in-law had given her precise instructions before she died, that she was to give me a box if she found out I had read her letter. We met in a small cafe. He wasn't wearing a suit, nor did he seem like a man interested in inheritances. He had the look of someone who had accompanied another person in their final days, not out of obligation, but out of empathy. She handed me a wooden box, sealed with an antique ribbon. She didn't say much, only she was afraid that no one would value what she wrote. When I got home, I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were several notebooks, manuscripts, hundreds of pages written in irregular, fragile yet intense handwriting. They were memoirs, not hers, mine, chronicles of the years we spent together, details I didn't even remember, my words, gestures, anecdotes, all told from her point of view. And on every page, a reconstruction of my presence in her life, not as a shadow, but as a salvation. There was even a prologue, written by Marcelo, explaining that these memoirs were going to be published, that she wanted to tell her story, but also mine, that the world should know that behind every woman who cares silently, there is a whole life of sacrifices, wounds, and unrecognized love. I cried for hours, not because of the book, not because of the publication, but because in the end, she had seen me, she had felt me, she had loved me in her own way, clumsy, silent, distant, but real. Nobody in the family knew, nobody asked, but I understood something that day. Sometimes recognition doesn't come in the way we ask for it. Sometimes love doesn't have perfect words. Sometimes what seemed like betrayal was actually a way of protecting us. My mother-in-law didn't leave me a house. She didn't leave me any jewelry. It left me with something more powerful. My story left me. The book was published months later under a pseudonym. She wasn't seeking fame. She wasn't seeking money. She simply wanted someone, somewhere, to read those pages and understand that there are women who love in silence, who care without applause, who support without receiving anything in return. I didn't tell my family. I didn't share it on social media. I just left it in a small bookstore downtown, among other titles that nobody looks for, but that sometimes finds someone who needs them. One afternoon, while I was having coffee in front of that bookstore window, I saw a woman pick up the book. She leafed through it slowly, and I saw a gesture on her face that I recognized. That slight tremor in her lip, that look that clouds over without warning. She took it with her. I didn't know her name, but in her I saw so many like me. Invisible women. Women who care. Women who break inside and still keep going. And I understood that the story my mother-in-law left me was no longer just mine. If you, who are watching this, have felt that your sacrifice is worthless, that your dedication goes unnoticed, that you give everything and receive silence, I want you to know something. Sometimes not being recognized is the clearest sign that you've become indispensable. And even if the world doesn't applaud you, even if someone else takes the inheritance, even if the thank you never comes, your worth does not depend on those who failed to see you. Your value is you.